Conflict is key to making literature interesting. One could even go so far as to say that a literary work that doesn't include conflict is one that fails. Conflict in literature can take either one of two forms, external or internal. A conflict can be defined as a struggle between the protagonist and an internal or external force that drives the story's plot. External conflict involves a struggle between the protagonist and other characters. The main external conflict typically occurs between the protagonist and the antagonist. Think of the famous novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. The external conflict is between Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, the man married to the woman he loves, Daisy. Gatsby is in love with Daisy and wants her at all costs. Tom is a violent and dangerous man who is willing to hurt and kill to keep Daisy. Daisy even makes a euphemistic reference to Tom's violent potential during a secret meeting with Gatsby where Nick, the narrator, serves as their lookout. And I quote, "Then they sauntered over to my house and sat on the steps for half an hour, while at her request I remained watchfully in the garden, in case there was a fire or flood, she explained, or any act of God." Here, we see Daisy referring to Tom's capacity for violence as looking out for any act of God. The potential external conflict between Gatsby and Tom provides the story with tension. We wait for a showdown between Tom, the violent former athlete, who is described as having a body capable of enormous leverage, a cruel body, and Gatsby, a man who made his way through the world as a mobster. Internal conflict versus external conflict. External conflict does a good job of driving the plot and creating tension in the story. We read on to see how the tension between our protagonist and antagonist will finally be resolved. Internal conflict, well, that's different. When we speak about internal conflict, we're talking about conflict that relates to the internal struggles or tension within our protagonist. This struggle may involve the difficulty or inability to reconcile opposing desires, emotions, or beliefs. Quite often, this internal conflict is related to the fatal flaw of a character, which leads eventually to their own downfall or tragedy. In an earlier article, we discussed the internal conflict within Okongwu in Chinua Achebe's novel, Things Fall Apart. He is afflicted with toxic masculinity that does not allow him to accept human instincts related to compassion or tenderness. He dooms himself by killing an adopted son because he was afraid of being thought weak. To learn more about Okongwu's dilemma, you can check out my previous article on internal conflict in Presenting Internal Conflict in Literature. Internal conflict is sometimes characterized as person versus self. External conflict can also be classified into 6 different types of conflicts. Let's take a look at each. Character versus character. That is a struggle between two characters, often the protagonist and antagonist. A good example of this would be Harry Potter versus Voldemort in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. Character versus self. This refers to an internal conflict where a character battles their own emotions or decisions. A good example of this would be Hamlet's indecision and inner turmoil in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Character versus nature. A character faces natural forces such as storms, animals, or disease. An example of this would be Santiago versus the Marine and the sea in Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Character versus society. A character stands in opposition to social norms, laws, or beliefs. A good example of this would be Anna versus Russian high society in Anna Karenina. Character versus the supernatural. That is where a character confronts forces beyond the natural world like ghosts or gods. A good example of this would be Ichabod Crane versus the Headless Horseman in Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. We also have character versus technology. This describes a character struggle against machines or technological forces. A good example of this would be Sarah Connor versus the cyborg assassin in The Terminator. And lastly, we have character versus fate. In this example, a character tries to escape or change destiny or prophecy. A good example of this would be Oedipus, which is his prophesied fate in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. The best written stories typically try to balance internal conflict with external conflict. For example, a character may have to resolve the internal struggle within themselves before they are ready to take on the main antagonist in an external conflict. Whatever the case, always make sure when you write your story that make sure it includes some vital and interesting conflict to capture the attention of the readers. Otherwise, it's not really a story at all.